Prophesy.
Prophesy.
He prophesied that a flood would cover the earth.
There was a great war between the countries, just as the elders had prophesied.
The prophet.
Prophet.
The prophet Elijah.
Followers of the prophet.
Gandhi was the prophet of non-violent protest.
Prophetess.
Prophetess.
Prophetic.
Prophetic.
It turned out to be a prophetic piece of journalism. Lundgren's warnings proved prophetic.
Prophetical.
Prophetical.
Prophylactic.
Prophylactic.
Prophylactic antibiotics. Prophylaxis.
Prophylaxis.
Propinquity.
Propinquity.
Propitiate.
Propitiate.
Propitiatory.
Propitiatory.
A proprietary gift of flowers.
Propitious.
Propitious.
A propitious moment.
Conditions after the 1905 revolution were propitious for stable development.
Proponent.
Proponent.
Steinem has always been a strong proponent of women's rights.
Dr. George is one of the leading proponents of this view.
Proportion.
Proportion.
The proportion of women graduates has increased in recent years.
Every parent is asked to contribute a proportion of the total cost. The decision affects a significant proportion of the population.
Although the majority of offenders are men, a small proportion, about 5%, are women.
What's the proportion of boys to girls in your class?
The rewards you get in this job are in direct proportion to the effort you put in.
Builders must learn about scale and proportion. Reduce the drawings so that all the elements stay in proportion.
Her feet are small in proportion to her height.
The porch is out of proportion with the rest of the house.
Try to reduce your tasks to more manageable proportions.
An ecological tragedy of enormous proportions.
For most of us, Scott was a hero of mythic proportions.
The flu outbreak has reached epidemic proportions.
A building of classic proportions.
The elegant proportions of the living room.
The fear of violent crime has now risen out of all proportion to the actual risk. Aren't you getting things rather out of proportion?
The whole issue has been blown out of all proportion.
Let's keep things in proportion.
You can protest by all means, but keep a sense of proportion.
The amount of damages awarded are proportion to the degree of injury caused.
Proportional.
Proportional.
The punishment should be proportional to the crime. The fee charged by the realtor is directly proportional to the price of the property.
A proportional increase in costs. Proportional representation.
Proportional representation.
Proportionate.
Proportionate.
Proportioned.
Proportioned.
Arnold's perfectly proportioned body.
A beautifully proportioned room.
Proposal.
Proposal.
The government's proposals for regulation of the industry.
The committee put forward a proposal to reduce the time limit.
They rejected proposals that the president should be directly elected.
She politely declined his proposal of marriage.
Propose.
Propose.
The changes were first proposed last year.
The proposed budget cuts.
In his speech, he proposed that the UN should set up an emergency centre for the environment.
The report also proposes expanding the airport. He proposed a compromise to me. The resolution was proposed by the chairman of the International Committee.
Mr. Leeson proposed Mrs. Banks for the position of treasurer.
A number of theories have been proposed to explain the phenomenon.
How does he propose to deal with the situation?
We still don't know how the company proposes raising the money.
Sean proposed to me only 6 months after we met.
I'd like to propose a toast to the bride and groom.
Proposed.
Proposed.
The document supplies details of the proposed changes.
The government is set to vote on the proposed reforms tomorrow.
Proposer.
Proposer.
Proposition.
Proposition.
Most people accept the proposition that we have a duty to protect endangered animals. Most people accept the proposition that we have a duty to protect endangered animals.
The theory is founded on 2 basic propositions.
He telephoned Stuart with a proposition.
The offer of 2 tickets for the price of 1 makes it a very attractive proposition.
It doesn't sound like a very viable proposition to me. I've got a proposition to put to you.
My new boss is a very different proposition.
Proposition 147.
Here, prostitutes constantly proposition tourists.
Propound.
Propound.
The theory of natural selection was first propounded by Charles Darwin.
Proppy.
Proppy.
Proprietary.
Proprietary.
A proprietary brand of insecticide. Proprietary software products.
They have proprietary rights to the data.
He has no proprietary interest in the farm.
Proprietor.
Proprietor.
The proprietor of a small hotel and restaurant.
Proprietorial.
Proprietorial.
She felt proprietorial about the valley.
Proprietress.
Proprietress.
Propriety.
Propriety.
They discussed the propriety of treating ill children against the wishes of the parents. They conducted themselves with propriety.
Strict in observing the proprieties.
Props. Props.
Props to Chris for all of his volunteer work.
Propulsion.
Propulsion.
Research into liquid hydrogen as a means of propulsion.
Pro rata.
Pro rata.
Fees are calculated on a pro rata basis.
Prorate.
Prorate.
The costs should be prorated.
Prosaic.
Prosaic.
A prosaic writing style.
The reality, however, is probably more prosaic.
Proscenium.
Proscenium.
The proscenium arch.
Prescribe.
Proscribe.
The Act prescribes discrimination on the grounds of race.
Prose.
Prose.
Prosecute.
Prosecute.
Shoplifters will be prosecuted.
Buxton is being prosecuted for assault.
The company is to be prosecuted under the Health and Safety Act.
Mrs. Lynn Smith, prosecuting, said the offence took place on January the 27th.
We cannot prosecute the investigation further.
Prosecution.
Prosecution.
A criminal prosecution.
Walters could face prosecution for his role in the robbery.
The prosecution of war criminals. The evidence is not sufficient to bring a prosecution against him.
The chief witness for the prosecution.
The prosecution of her duties.
Prosecutor.
Prosecutor.
Proselytize.
Proselytize.
Prosody.
Prosody.
Prospect.
Prospect.
I see no prospect of things improving here.
There is every prospect of the weather remaining dry this week.
There are good prospects for growth in the retail sector.
There's a real prospect that England will not qualify for the World Cup.
The prospect of marriage terrified Alice.
Greeks face the prospect of new general elections next month. He relishes the prospect of a fight. She wasn't exactly overjoyed at the prospect of looking after her niece.
I had no job, no education, and no prospects.
Job prospects for graduates don't look good.
A new round of trade talks is in prospect.
The company is prospecting for gold in Alaska. Salesman prospecting for new customers.
Prospective.
Prospective.
The prospective costs of providing pensions.
Prospector.
Prospector.
Prospectus.
Prospectus.
Prosper.
Prosper.
Businesses across the state are prospering.
Prosperity.
Prosperity.
A time of economic prosperity.
The future prosperity of the country.
Prosperous.
Prosperous.
A prosperous landowner.
Prostate.
Prostate.
Prosthesis.
Prosthesis.
Prostitute.
Prostitute.
Friends from the theater criticized him for prostituting his talent in the movies.
Prostitution.
Prostitution.
Prostrate.
Prostrate.
They found him lying prostrate on the floor. Julie was prostrate with grief after her father's death.
They were prostrated by grief.
Protagonist.
Protagonist.
The main protagonists in the conflict.
A protagonist of educational reform.
Protean.
Protean.
Protect.
Protect.
Are we doing enough to protect the environment? The cover protects the machine from dust.
Physical exercise can protect you against heart disease.
Waxing your car will help protect against rust.
Unemployment insurance means that you're partially protected if you lose your job.
Protected.
Protected.
Spotted owls are a protected species.
Protection.
Protection.
The protection of the environment.
Evidence that vitamin C gives protection against cancer. This law provides protection for threatened animals and plants.
The police were issued with body armour for extra protection.
McGee pulled up his collar as protection against the breeze.
Do you have any protection?
Protection money.
A protection racket.
Protectionism.
Protectionism.
Protective.
Protective.
Protective clothing.
Sunscreen provides a protective layer against the sun's harmful rays.
I can't help feeling protective towards my kids.
He's very protective of his younger brother.
Protective tariffs.
Protective custody.
Protective custody.
The children were taken into protective custody.
Protector.
Protector.
Protectorate.
Protectorate.
Protégé.
Protégé.
She attempted to encourage her young protégé.
Protein.
Protein.
Pro tem.
Pro tem.
The President pro tem of the Senate.
Protest.
Protest.
Students held a protest march against the war.
5,000 employees came out on strike in protest at the poor working conditions.
I turned off the TV despite loud protests from the kids.
He accepted his punishment without protest.
She ignored his protests and walked away.
The programme caused a storm of protest.
The announcement was met with howls of protest.
The bill was eventually paid under protest.
Thousands of people blocked the street, protesting against the new legislation.
Students protested the decision.
I don't see why I should take the blame for this, she protested.
Clive protested that he hadn't been given enough time to do everything.
Sarah protested that she wasn't Mick's girlfriend.
Years later, he is still protesting his innocence.
Protestant.
Protestant.
Protestation.
Protestation.
Protestations of innocence.
Protester.
Protester.
Proto.
Proto. A proto-fascist group. A prototype.
Protocol.
Protocol.
A breach of diplomatic protocol.
The Montreal Protocol on the protection of the ozone layer.
Proton.
Proton.
Protoplasm.
Protoplasm.
Prototype.
Prototype.
A working prototype of the new car.
Prototypical.
Prototypical.
Prototypical behavior.
Protozoan.
Protozoan.
Protracted.
Protracted.
The expense of a protracted legal battle.
Protractor.
Protractor.
Protrude.
Protrude.
The envelope was protruding from her bag.
Protrusion.
Protrusion.
Protuberance.
Protuberance.
This dinosaur is recognizable by the protuberance on the top of its head.
Proud.
Proud.
Her parents are very proud of her.
You should be proud of yourself.
His past record is certainly something to be proud of.
The company is justly proud of its achievements.
7-year-old Ian is proud to have earned his red belt in karate.
She was proud that the magazine had agreed to publish one of her stories. Seth was the proud owner of a new sports car.
His proudest moment was winning the European Cup final.
A proud man who would not admit his mistakes.
Some farmers were too proud to ask for government help. I tried to do my country proud.
Prove.
Prove.
You're wrong and I can prove it. Tests have proved that the system works. I knew he had done it, but there was no way I could prove it to Eddie. He claims the police destroyed records that could prove the officer's guilt. They say I'm too old, but I'm going to prove them all wrong. To prove his point, he mentioned several other experiments which had produced similar results. The recent revelations may prove embarrassing to the president. The design proved to be a success.
When I first started this job, I felt I had to prove myself.
She's proved herself to be a very reliable worker. I'm not going to run the marathon just to prove a point.
Proven.
Proven.
A player of proven ability.
A telephone system with a proven track record of reliability.
Provenance.
Provenance.
The provenance of the paintings is unknown.
Artworks of doubtful provenance.
Proverb.
Proverb.
Proverbial.
Proverbial.
The store had everything, including the proverbial kitchen sink.
A proverbial expression.
His modesty is proverbial.
Provide.
Provide.
Tea and biscuits will be provided.
The hotel provides a shoe cleaning service for guests.
The project is designed to provide young people with work.
We're hoping the inquiry will provide an explanation for the accident.
The search provided the police with several vital clues.
Health insurance will provide against loss of income if you become ill. Without work, how can I provide for my children?
The new constitution provides for a 650-seat legislature.
Commanders failed to provide for an attack by sea.
Provided.
Provided.
He can come with us, provided he pays for his own meals.
Providence.
Providence.
Divine providence.
Provident.
Provident.
Providential.
Providential.
Provider.
Provider.
An internet service provider.
A widow, she is the sole provider for her family.
Providing.
Providing.
You can borrow the car, providing I can have it back by 6 o'clock.
Province.
Province.
A Chinese province.
Computers were once the exclusive province of scientists and mathematicians.
Provincial.
Provincial.
A provincial election.
The provincial government of Quebec.
A provincial town.
Provincial attitudes.
Provincialism.
Provincialism.
Proving ground.
Proving ground.
High crime areas are proving grounds for new police officers.
Provision.
Provision.
The provision of childcare facilities.
Provision for people with disabilities.
He made provisions for his wife and his children in his will.
We had enough provisions for 2 weeks.
The agreement includes a provision for each side to check the other side's weapons.
Under the provisions of the Act, employers must supply safety equipment.
Provisional.
Provisional.
A provisional government.
We accept provisional bookings by phone.
The meeting has been provisionally arranged for the end of May.
Provisional license.
Provisional license.
Proviso.
Proviso.
The money was given to the museum with the proviso that it should be spent on operating costs.
Provocation.
Provocation.
She claims that Graham attacked her without any provocation.
He was accused of deliberate provocation. Julie has a tendency to burst into tears at the slightest provocation.
Provocative.
Provocative.
The minister's provocative remarks were widely reported in the press. A provocative act by a terrorist group.
She was accused of being deliberately provocative.
Provocative images of young girls.
Provoke.
Provoke.
The proposal provoked widespread criticism. The decision to invade provoked storms of protest.
The novel has provoked fierce debate in the U.S.
She hopes her editorial will provoke readers into thinking seriously about the issue.
Emma, though still at school, was provoked to help too.
The dog would not have attacked if it hadn't been provoked.
Paul tried to provoke Fletch into a fight.
Provost.
Provost.
Prow.
Prow.
Prowess.
Prowess.
His physical prowess.
Military prowess.
Prowl.
Prowl.
Gangs of teenagers prowling the streets.
Irene prowled restlessly around the room.
Local men out on the prowl in the city's bars and nightclubs.
She's always on the prowl for bargains.
Prowler.
Prowler.
The police were called after a prowler was spotted near their home.
Proximate.
Proximate.
Proximity.
Proximity.
We chose the house for its proximity to the school.
The proximity of the Bahamas to the States. Here the rich and the poor live in close proximity.
Proxy.
Proxy.
You can vote by proxy.
A husband acting as proxy for his wife.
A proxy vote.
Prude.
Prude.
Prudence.
Prudence.
Financial prudence.
Prudent.
Prudent.
Prudent house buyers.
It might be prudent to get a virus detector for the network. The prudential.
Prudential.
Prudery.
Prudery.
Prudish.
Prudish.
American culture is in many ways still fairly prudish.
Prune.
Prune.
The roses need pruning.
The company is pruning staff in order to reduce costs. The original version of the text has been pruned quite a bit.
Stewed prunes.
Prurient.
Prurient.
Prurient interests.